Ministério do Turismo e Associação Casa
Ministry
Azul
of Tourism and Casa Azul Association present the 80th Flip, the International Literature Festivity of Paraty. The project benefit from the incentive culture Vale Mais Cultura and has this official sponsorship of Itaú, support of the municipality of Paraty, Piero Net's lawyers, and WAL. Associação Casa Azul and the Special Secretariat of Cultures, Ministry of Tourism, federal government. If you want to repair the world, to understand, that is not simple. To bet in the strength of dialogue and perceive the absolute truth. They are absolutely fragile. To exercise, to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and understand the fanatism blinds you. To trust in democratic values and to defend the solutions of two states for the conflict Palestine, Israeli, and both people should live in peace. You should embrace the people without religious doctrine and to know the value of human life. And because you are Brazilian and also Zionist. IBI. Ready?
Olá, muito boa tarde
Hi.
a todos.
Good afternoon,
Eu sou a
everyone.
Carol, eu
I am
faço parte da
Carol.
equipe do
I'm
Instituto
part
Brasil-Israel.
of
O IB é uma
Brazil-Israel
instituição
team.
que busca trazer complexidade para os
IBI
debates
brings
relacionados a
complexity to
Israel
the debates
e
related
produz
to
bastante
Israel
conteúdo nesse
and
sentido.
has a lot of
Então, eu
content in
convido a
this
todos a
sense. So I
acompanharem as
invite
nossas
you
redes
to
sociais
follow
para
our
saber mais
social
sobre o
media
nosso trabalho.
to know
Gostaria de
more about
agradecer a
our
todos
work.
que estão
Thank you
aqui
very
nos
much who are
assistindo
present
e
here,
também aos convidados da mesa
seeing
de hoje.
us, and
Para
the
mim é uma
guests
grande
for our
honra
tape
abrir
today.
essa
Is a
mesa
great
com convidados
honor
tão
to have
maravilhosos.
wonderful guests in this
Flávia,
table.
Amos,
Flávio,
Flávio, muito obrigada
Flávio,
por
thank you very much
aceitarem o convite do IB para
for
participar dessa mesa
saying
sobre
yes
cinema e
to our
literatura.
invitations for cinema
Essa
and
mesa,
literature
inclusive, vai ter tradução
table. You're
simultânea,
going to
mas
have
também é
simultaneous
possível
interpretation,
assistir
but
em
you
inglês.
can have in
Eu
English.
vou apresentar, então,
I
o nosso
will
mediador de
introduce
hoje.
our mediator
O
today.
Flávio Sampaio,
Flávio
ele é jornalista,
Sampaio is a
fotógrafo e
journalist, a photographer,
publicitário,
and
especializado em
advertising
estratégia de
executive
conteúdo há mais
specializing
de
in content
25 anos,
strategies
é
for over 25
pós-graduado em
years.
jornalismo
He has a
político e
postgraduate degree in
internacional pela
political and
PUC de São
international
Paulo,
journalism from
com
PUC São
especialização
Paulo,
em
with
marketing digital nos
specialization in
Estados
digital
Unidos
marketing in the
e
USA,
colabora com diversos
where
veículos,
he
como
lived
Folha de São
between 2000
Paulo,
and
Valor
2008. He
Econômico,
collaborates in the main
Piauí,
Brazilian
entre
media
outros.
such as Folha de
Dos
São
filhos do
Paulo,
Flávio,
Exame, Valor
inclusive, foi meu aluno.
Econômico, Piauí, and among others. One of his kids was my student. It's a great pleasure to have you here, to have two great persons in the cinema and literature as well. You have the presentations, who they are, and then we are going to have questions because you don't have that time to talk about so many things. Flavia Castro is a writer and a filmmaker, and she wrote and directed award-winning documentaries, A Diary of a Search. We are going to talk about memory construction, memory. She had his Diary of a Search, and the fictional feature Deslembro, Unremember, that debuted in the official selections in 2018 Venice Film Festival and awards, and criticized of the audience in various festivals. Because of a dictatorship, she left Brazil when she was 5 and came when she was 14, and had 15 houses and 7 different countries. She had 2 parents, and she finished the last film, the saga of small gestures, that is revolutionaries, that is the revolutionary saga of Daniel. Amos Gitai, that is in the south of France, talking to us. He was born in 1915 Haifa in the north of Israel, 2 years after the creation of the state of Israel. In 1972, she has a present from her mother, a camera of a Super 8, and she had to go to the army. Man, 3 years, and woman, 2 years, and he had this experience from the point of view of a soldier. In 73, in the Yom Kippur, when he had in a year redemption and rescue, he was about to have 23 years old and he was about to get died. So he has this complex country going deeply in dichotomy and narratives. He is a very known, remarkable filmmaker, and she is now in Israel and in France altogether. And I have a question for you, and has to do with Flavia too. You too has the memory as the central core of your work, and you have your personal and the collective memories. So when you have the wars for the narratives, as they are so dangerous as the frontline battles, how you are as historians as well as storyteller? What is the memory of the society? Can you have a summary in English? Eu estou
Nowadays it's deixa eu só mudar meu canal aqui, senão eu vou ficar louco. I'm talking about narratives. You always have your personal memory and the collective memory, and you deal with that really well. My concern is about what we're going to remember as a whole society from 20 years from now.
No, the main issue is
a principal questão, como você mencionou, na minha experiência,
in Israel, and I made originally I'm an architect. I'm just an architect because I was supposed to follow the footsteps of my father. My father was a Bauhaus architect. He studied in Germany. He was a student of Mies van der Rohe, of Kandinsky. And when Hitler came to power, Goebbels closed the Bauhaus, and he was beaten. They broke his teeth. They threw him to jail. And luckily, they expelled him. And he arrived to Palestine, to Israel, in the 30s through Switzerland. And originally, I was supposed to follow him. So I made studies in architecture in Israel. Then I made a PhD in the University of California at Berkeley in architecture. And when I stopped to collect all the stamps of the academic world, I decided to do something else. And the reason that I decided to do something else, you mentioned in your little introduction, because I was shot in the war. I saw the consequences of military battles. And so I thought that for me, cinema was and still is a civic activity. It means that all my films, now I've done this year, we're kind of celebrating 40 years that I started to do movies. So all my films are a look, most of them at my own society. And I think that the filmmaker is a bit like a healer, like in the African or the pre-monotheistic cultures, is a healer. So he looks at what is not working in the society, and by expressing a point of view many times critical to the society, he is trying to bring people to think. So I think that all my work is about, like you mentioned, memory. It's about memory, but it's also a civic activity. It's true about Kadosh or about Kippur or about sometimes with local Israeli and Palestinian actors like Yael Abekassis or Yam Abbas, the Palestinian, or even the most recent film, which is a mixture of Israeli and Palestinian actors, or works I did with Natalie Portman or Juliette Binoche or Jean Moreau, which I learned a lot from Jean Moreau. So it's always a civic action. I say that actually I would do a film for two main reasons, or because I'm very moved by something, or because I'm very pissed off by something. So these are the two main reasons I'll do a film. I consider it a privilege that I never did a film which I didn't feel like doing, or I didn't find that it's necessary to speak out, or the film I did more recently about the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, the Israeli Prime Minister. So most of my work is really about memory, or what we did last year in Sao Paulo, when with the Festival of Sao Paulo, with our friends Renata and also the producers Paula and Joao, and with my friend Walter Salles, we did an evening of reading of the letters of my mother. So you would think that that my mother was a typical Jewish woman who wants her son to admire her. It's not so much the case. She was a critical thinker, my mother, and she was born in Israel and Palestine. And I think that through her letters, you can see the transformation of the country. And I thought it's a gesture also to my mother, but more than that, it's a proposition. So in a way, when I make a film, let's say about the assassination of Rabin or about Kippur, it's both a look at the historical event. We want to engrave it in the memory, not to help people who want to erase it. At the same time, it is a statement about the future. What kind of figures we would like to have running the country? Would we like to have just very smart maneuverers and so on, or do we want people who will try to break the impasse of the Middle East and create some sort of different relationship? So I think that most of the films I've done now, people say almost 90 films. I mean, 23 big feature films, a similar amount of documentaries, and then some shorts. I did some exhibitions, I did books and so on. And it's all really dedicated to the sense of bringing, of how can cinema make us think? Because I'm a kind of a person that I think that the best films I've seen in my life, and not just my film, of course, but other films, I start when the screening is over, because you go home and you have to try to figure out what was this person trying to tell me. And sometimes it's not even easy to digest it. So you will have to work not as a consumer, but as an interpreter. And I think this is also in the good part of the Jewish tradition. It's the Talmudic study again and again and again and again of a text that we want to interpret. We want to see it again and again. And this is the relations. And this is the ongoing work in cinema.
Obrigado. Eu vou passar a palavra para a Flávia. Eu queria também ouvir.
Oh, I would like to have Flavia. I would like to have your feedback about that, your answer.
Flávia.
Flavia?
Acho que você está no mudo, Flávia.
Flavia, you're in mute. Are you here?
Eu não ouvi a tua pergunta.
Eu vou voltar, então. A gente estava falando sobre memória.
We are talking about memory, right? Individual and collective memory. My question is about this struggle of narratives. When you have in this digital era, is very powerful, right? So my question is, when you look back, what is going to be in history the moment that you are living right now? What is going to be memorized? Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be with you and with Amos Gitai. It's a great pleasure to share this space with you. It's funny, your question, Flavio, because I have been thinking a lot about that. I have the sensation that in present you are in a astonished moment. It's so severe that you are living. It's so far beyond you could imagine. I see texts and conversations, and I can imagine this present as a past. They want to go for a future. You cannot imagine a future. So I myself, I'm doing the mental exercise to imagine how it would be thinking about the present. That is horrible. Long time when you think years ahead. I myself didn't have that time. What is outside me has such a space, so the subjectivity cannot articulate because of the burden of is taking place. It's really a catastrophe. About the narratives, it has really, they have a lot to do with this. It's an abstract, but I'm talking about a country that you have a government that denies a pandemic. They do the opposite, and they do through news and everything. But the narratives, it starts when you start to tell the stories, many versions and many points of view. It comes back in the beginning. So you have to see how the media created a narrative that took us to the impeachment of Dilma. It's always present in history. When you think in a more personal point of view, there is an exercise to be done that is always think what you are bringing from the past is being written in the present. It makes sense in the present. So the films of Amos, they are perfect translations. They do these films they have been doing this for 30 years with issues that go through all the time our lives in our presence. These films come from stories that never find a solutions. You know, you have the borders, the exile, the identities, and they have been doing through in this historical time quite long. So you have something that I was thinking. There is a film that I saw. It's New from Home, New from House, News from Home, New from House. That it was cute because they got a shortcut that they had where he talked about the story of characters through the history of one house, the people that occupy the house, and the documentary, they will have these people again. I think 2 years later, what happened to them? And in the off of the second documentary, there is a sentence that says a lot what you are trying to do. I find it great. To do a documentary is to dig until you have the hidden structure by the present. It's from archaeology all about, and it brought to my attention because you are talking about the construction of a memory, imaginary of the memory, to dig. I think I didn't go into depth. I have to dig it up, dig it in. So just to open this discussion, this is the point, and I can tell later how I had this film going on, because one comes first and then the second. As Amos said, it comes from his experience and my experience too. I wouldn't do any film. I didn't want to be a filmmaker. It was not my desire. I want to have a specific film, and then and it was about the diary of a search. You're going to be back. So everything starts from this film, right? So Amos, you came to Brazil a year ago, and then you had a meeting in one of the founder of Institute Brasil-Israel. I was present. And I asked you in that time about your experiences to live in kibbutz. And you said that it was the most wonderful time of your life to live in a kibbutz. The essence of the kibbutz is the sharing, is the collective construction, is the notion of a community. So I'd like to hear from you the kibbutzing, a new old solution for the future. I think you have.
No, I want to relate a bit to what Flavia said before, because she spoke about the distinction that I like to do. Flavia, c'est OK si je parle anglais, oui, tu comprends. Flavia, you get it when I speak English, or you prefer that I speak French?
No, go in English, please.
Francês seria só para mim, né? Vai em inglês.
Non, je réponds d'abord à ta question, Flavia, à ton chose que tu as évoquée. C'est-à-dire que moi, je trouve qu'il y a des distinctions entre le documentaire et la fiction. C'est-à-dire, moi, j'aime pas les docudramas, par exemple, parce que je trouve que c'est deux médiums distincts. I will say it in English. I think there is a distinction between. I'm responding to something that Flavia said before. I think there is a distinction between documentary and fiction. And documentary is a great medium, so it's not inferior to fiction. There are two autonomous, very strong mediums. Each one has its own rules. And when we approach a project, we make a conscientious decision if we want to do a fiction or documentary. Let's say when Flavia looks for the remains of the fragments of the story of the disappearance of her father in Porto Alegre, she wants to make a documentary because she wants the real fragments to exist in this documentary that she does. When I did, Flavia made reference to News from Home, a film that I did over 25 years in 3 phases. I did not want to make a fiction. I wanted to make a documentary because I also wanted to deal with the dimension of time. Because the first film was shot 40 years ago, 1980, then the second one 15 years later, and the third one 25 years later. So by keeping digging, and she made reference to a metaphor that I always speak about, archaeology, that I think that documentary is like archaeology, because you excavate, and when you do your work as an archaeologist, you cannot and you should not be too brutal. Because if an archaeologist will bring a bulldozer, he will destroy the site of the documentary. He will destroy the site of the archaeology. So you have to use a brush, taking little by little the stones, and doing something delicately, so the truth will emerge from the fragments without application of force. And this is why I'm not very fond of a method like Michael Moore, when he comes like a bulldozer and want to feed us with a spoon, his opinion, even if politically, I think that in many cases he's right. But I think that when you apply too much force and spectacular cinema into documentary, you destroy your own argument. And when I see this kind of attitude in documentary, I start to ask questions about ideas that normally I agree with. Because I say, why do the person need to be so forceful, manipulative, to take a bomb and then the image of George Bush and this and this? We don't need it. So I think that documentary is a great medium, very powerful, and it is distinct than fiction. So in this metaphor, I would say that documentary is like archaeology, and fiction is like architecture. Because in fiction, you start by an idea, you don't have yet the parameter, and you build around the idea. You build, like an architect will have a design, and then he will build something out of an idea. In a documentary, it's the other procedure. There is the reality in front of you, and you have to articulate the components of the reality, which makes part of your movie. And also in documentary, you mentioned, as I said, News from Home is film I did over 25 years. So over 25 years, people have changed. They don't change by making makeup, maquillage. They change because they age, they speak differently, maybe they change their ideas and so on. So it's very interesting to see the transformation in a documentary over time. And so I agree with what you mentioned. Then you want
uma master class aqui, hein? Flávia tendo uma master class.
Maravilhoso.
Go on.
Posso falar?
Pode falar.
No, you want me to continue or no?
She wants to speak again.
Yes.
Não.
No?
Maybe. Onde
Vou ter que falar em português, né?
Sim.
Okay.
Tá.
Speak Portuguese. It's just what you said about the characters. You have the time effect of the characters and the way to see their own history. It's fantastic to capture that. And you have to embrace these characters. That is different from these documentary that are spectacular to see what the filmmaker decide to see. So this is the way of the perception of the world or the place of the filmmaker as a citizen of the world. So they are very touching, the character of each character of the film. And you can see their body and their speech, the time, and you're lucky to have the moments. It's so beautiful. That's it. So I'll be back to my original question to Amos about his period living in kibbutz. I'm saying that because if you talk to your groups, friends that I know, that I don't know, people come with the same day. Hey, let's get together. You find a land, you buy some houses, you get all together. One helps the other, and I say, this is as old as time. It's kibbutz. It happened 50 years ago.
No, I think that everybody in every culture want to choose the elements that he want to identify with, that are part of his identity. Let's say when I visited Brazil, and I visited many times, I without over-idealizing it, because I don't like angelism. I don't like it.
We know that.
Yeah. And because angelism is up there. I think we are full of contradictions. And I am a big collector of contradictions. I like contradictions. We are all contradictory. But it's a meeting of people from different origins, which produce this Brazilian identity, or the good part of the Brazilian identity, not the authoritarian fascist part of it, but the one which is interested in the mixture between the different cultures. So this is me looking at Brazil from the exterior. But if I have to talk about my own culture, I'm again, without the angelism, I think that one of the most original things that were created in Israel by socialist, feminist, is the idea of a non-authoritarian collective, meaning not a Soviet style of collective, but a voluntary kind of collective, obviously it has its problems. Like every group of people, when they are together, it has its problem. But I think that the feminist movement who wanted to have the children grow together and have time of their own, and not just cook and produce children, but have. So I think it's interesting. Also, as an architect, the architectural challenge was great because the kibbutz immediately had to create pedestrian areas. Mm-hmm. So no vehicles, so people can walk in nature and so on. And I think it's an interesting model, which is very menaced. The Israeli right wing does not like the kibbutz because it's a challenge to capitalistic vision of how to organize society and so on. So obviously they challenge it, but I think it is a part of the non-formal, let's say, DNA of the creative part of Israel, which I'm interested because, you know, obviously you can choose your identity. Some people will choose religion, and some people will choose nationalism. Some people will choose other ideas, you know, and each one of us will identify it. And then the question that we ask, because we speak about cinema, not only about ideology. And as you know, that Flavia mentioned it, film is not just the argument or the thematic, but it's a rapport between form and narrative. So it's if you, in my mind, if you try to make, let's say, a progressive statement by a reactionary form, it is a reactionary film. And if you try to, so there's a lot of film which are only formal and they don't say anything. And there are some films which are only ideology or argument and no form. And for me, it's also not. So the interesting and this very fragile equilibrium between form and narrative is a good question because, I mean, if you go back to my story, since my father was an architect, modernist architect, and my mother was a storyteller, I have both. You know, I have the form and the storytelling, and when they fight each other, I find myself between them. But I think these are some of the great challenges of making movies.
Vou fazer uma pergunta para Flávia.
Question to you, Flavia.
Você disse que assim, quando a ameaça...
You said that when there is a threat,
quando tem uma ameaça de censura,
when you have a threat of censorship that you are living today, when it becomes a reality that is very concrete, you have the counterpoint of silencing is survival all about. And one of the ways to preserve collective memory through personal memories. You say these deconstructions of remembrances. So what do you mean by that? I think it has a lot to do with the history of Amos Gitai that he talked about. This idea came, he had the diary of the search. It is an excavation to understand how my father died. He was an activist and he died much after the dictatorship, but it was not after, but during, but it was in the end of it in '84. So the film was really to try to understand what happened with the death. So when you start to do the film, you have the life story of my father. By the time that I was writing, it is a written documentary. I had a script as a fiction of the history of my father. It was like a fiction, but the life was so important to me in this documentary to really get to know about his life experience through countries, the exile, the political battles and the political death that is really a riddle, enigma without a solution. So when I was having this film made, it took 2 years to assemble these. And I was feeling the gap because the documentary demanded me the real relationship. The subjectivity is very strong in this documentary, but I couldn't go far beyond it. And something that really was important to me in this experience, diary of a search, when my mother was talking to me, when I read the letters of my father that is very present in the film, the stories could be completely different. The time, the subjectivity, the creation of each of the situation, you would have different ways. And I had my own memory when I was a little girl in the Cope of Chile, for example, that it was very important to me. I want to go into depth about the memory, because you have moments in life and how you could have a film at the end of the day. So I had the need to go into depth in this excavation that started in the diary of the search. And then I had this imagination following me and could transcend the sensation that it was a history in the beginning and opening to the present, because any film you write in the present. So just remember, it was ready in Venice, and Bolsonaro was elected, and it was in the sample of São Paulo, in the exhibition of São Paulo, I had this film done. So all the script of this Lembro, you had with me and people around me, that the station that you were really rescue have this history of the past that was not enough in terms of storytelling. You didn't have this memory public policy. You should not forget about this story. And actually, it was denied. We are not talking about that. You had people say that, we had people say, dictatorship is good, torture is good. We saw this. So it's very specific. So when I start to have the idea of the film Deslembro, I just remember you don't have this representation of the film. In the case of my film, it is the experience of the children of the exile. So a part of the population they deny the experience of this part of the history. So this Lembro was born and it goes to a situation that I thought I would never see this situation before. In the case of Amos Gitai, you have a very interesting history, because it's 25 years of Yitzhak Rabin assassination. And Rabin was assassinated by a Jewish extreme right in Israel. And Amos Gitai has this relationship is very strong with this subject, and it's a very important and lively documentary films. You cannot deny this historic fact. So, Amos Gitai, what you are preparing for the following futures in terms of the project of Rabin that had this 25 years of death, and I think it's one of the books that you are working, right, Amos? You have two books that you are working. One is for the Collège de France, is about cinema, archive and memories, and the other one is about the assassination of Rabin.
I think it's a good question. I like, let's take another medium. Let's take Picasso. So Picasso in 1936, he witnessed the bombardment of the village, the Basque village, Guernica, by the German Luftwaffe, which in a way prepared the Nazi operations of the Second World War with Franco and the fascists and so on. So what does Picasso do? He does painting. This is his language. This is his medium. He does this very impressive painting that we all know. It's called Guernica. Now we can ask ourselves, did the painting change the Civil War? No, it didn't change. Franco won the Civil War and he stayed in power for a very long time. So the interesting question is, what is the options left to artists, filmmakers, writers in this context who have a critical point of view of history? What can they do? So Picasso, one of the first things he does, he forbid the voyage of Guernica back to Spain as long as Franco is alive. So the Guernica stayed in New York at the MoMA until the death of Franco. The Americans, of course, wanted to keep it a bit longer, but the testimony of Picasso was clear, and now it is in Madrid, in the Reina Sofia. But so let's ask ourselves, what is the impact again of the Guernica on the real life, on the politics? Because we artists, filmmakers, in my mind, we don't have a direct impact on politics, fortunately or unfortunately. But we have to preserve memory. And memory is a very tricky thing, because let's see what happened last year. Last year, Spain elected a socialist prime minister, and this prime minister put as the first priority of his administration to take out the bones of Franco from this kitsch mausoleum that he built to himself and put them in another cemetery and evacuate Franco from this kitsch monument. And you ask yourself, how come a prime minister, meaning a political figure from the left, does this? And it's only because of painters, militants, writers who spoke about the destructive impact of the fascists on Spanish history. So in a way, the Guernica has not been wasted. And when we speak, to go back to the question, you asked me about Rabin. Rabin was assassinated this year.
And your book, I think, I'm assuming you're writing a book about the 25th.
Yes, yes. And if you come to Paris, it will be a big exhibition in March. And also,
are you inviting me? Are you inviting me to go to
Paris?
Yes. Okay, yes. I will. Okay.
Yeah, but then you have to learn French.
Yeah. Well.
Good
time to learn.
You're welcome. So we're doing the exhibition on my archive. Also, I will do a performance at the theater about. It's called Chronicle of an Assassination. Mm-hmm. And so I think that the fact that I took a public event, dramatic, tragic event, which is in the public domain, it's not me, but I was challenged with the idea: how do we take this as a point of departure and make a movie that you probably have seen, Rabin, The Last Day, mm-hmm. and then make a piece of theater which was both at the Palais des Papes in Avignon, then last year in the Philharmonie de Paris, then at the Lincoln Center, then in Los Angeles. So in a way, as I mentioned, the works of art in my mind, they don't even need to have an immediate. It's not because you will say something about the situation of Brazil right now that it will change immediately, because the reality or the political reality works on a different timeline than the arts, But it doesn't alleviate the necessity to speak about it in order to keep the memory that something else is possible, that we should urge to have a different kind of human relations, and we cannot accept to yield to violence. We cannot accept it. And so it is a kind of if you like, a cultural cinematic resistance by installing the fact, and by, in this case, making a film, a book, etc. And I think that these things, they like I mentioned about Guernica, they make their own roads, because obviously people will go, if we stay with the Guernica, to the Reina Sofia to watch the painting, they will say the composition of color is beautiful, the frame is good, this horse face. But by doing that, they will also register something about that the artist wanted to give us, which is to register the horror of this bombardment on a civil village. So I think that we cannot ignore the necessity to have a civic engagement, meaning not a stupid demagogic position, but a civic engagement, because, and I would say that the best homage that the artist can do to his own country is to be critical. Critical because we love it, because we want it to be better, because we think that people should think what kind of life they should, because we don't want to waste our own life as creators just doing nonsense. So we have to speak about content, and this is my attitude to my own country. I think it's a very creative country. It's, in a way, I like a lot Brazil in similar way that I like my own country, because it is a bit schizophrenic. You have wonderful, sensitive, bright, intelligent, creative people, and in the same body, vulgar, kitsch guys at the same, and even worse, in the same body. And they kind of, these two cultures exist in the same body, but it means that we cannot make a generalization to be completely against it, or so we have to support the elements which we like to support. So in the past, Stalin accused the Jews that they are cosmopolitan. I consider it a compliment, because we want something good for our culture, but we would like to see something good for other places as well.
Bom, você é um exemplo de o que é sujeito.
You are a very good example of a cosmopolitan citizen.
É israelense.
Because you are Israeli, you live half part in France and another part in the United States. You are in a guest professor in Columbia University, right?
About my teaching in Columbia, you were asking me? I didn't get all the question.
No, what I just said is that you are very cosmopolitan, because you share your time between Israel and France and New York. Maybe you should spend some more time in Brazil. This is an invitation.
I mean, if you think I can be of any use, I would love to.
Definitely.
Anyway, I can tell you a top secret, because we're working with my friend Walter Salles on a joint project. So perhaps it will happen.
Well, maybe you could share some more information about this top secret.
But this, since we're doing it together, I don't want to promote it on my own. I like when I work with somebody that we should discuss.
Fiction or documentary?
I mean, I think you're trying to squeeze me into questions. No. Let's
Yeah,
wait.
that's what
I spoke yesterday to Walter, who told me that he's somewhere in the Pampas, and otherwise he would have joined us. But let's keep it. You know, my mother. We started with my mother. My mother always told me, "Don't be afraid. Keep something for the next time."
Okay, and Jewish mother is always right?
Yeah, but you know, she was not a kind of a kitsch, pushy mother. She was a good thinker, you know. And you know the book we published of her letters. No, you've seen it, no? That Florencia published it, and there was this beautiful evening organized by Renata de Almeida and Paula at the theater in São Paulo. Because Renata invited me several times in the last years I couldn't come. So she said to me, Amos, I know what will make you come. We'll translate the letters of your mother and then you will come. And I did come.
She was right.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you, well, we have 9 more minutes. So I'm going to ask you a specific question about the pandemics. How do you handle, como é que você aguenta tantas lives? How do you handle so many lives?
I mean, you know, if something good will happen from this terrible event, it will be that people will change the mode of consuming nature and travel much less. You know, since March, I did not fly anywhere. You know, and I was writing and thinking and trying to be careful also, because in Israel, Israel is very good in vaccination, but not so much Europe. So, and maybe it will change. You know, sometimes crisis, tragedy even make people think. You know, so already perhaps it helped to get rid of Trump. It's not. It's a beginning of something. You know, and. I don't know. I don't want to give to such a terrible, tragic event too many, but I think we need to really think. I mean, humanity, not just us talking about it. We need to think how can, if I have to make a reference, we wrote an article with some architects in the Italian newspaper La Repubblica. And I decided to choose another filmmaker that I love very much, which is Pasolini. And Pasolini wrote this beautiful essay about the disappearance of the luciole, you know, the fireflies, these little insects which used to make light in his childhood. Yeah, and it's a text of Pasolini that I like a lot. So the greed and money and the industrial pollution without taking care of any other parameters made these little insects, these poetic insects disappear. And I don't know, you know, and I think that we still have to be prudent by speaking too much about it, because we are still in the midst of the pandemic and a lot of people are suffering. And but if a crisis, you know, Europe, after almost burning the entire continent with 2 world wars, finally realized that they have to be a bit more rational, that they can disagree, they don't need to kill, that they have to find ways, mechanisms to deal with conflicts, that they have to protect nature, all sort of things. So in a way, these terrible wars, the massacre of tens of millions of people in the most horrible manner, was a strong shock to bring the Europeans to think a bit differently how to manage things. And perhaps we'll see what happens. Perhaps we'll not go to the old ways of the destruction of the planet, and perhaps we can leave something for the next generations, you know. So So this is about political will, of course.
Flávia, eu queria aproveitar esses últimos minutinhos também para saber como que você
So,
enfrentou
Flavia,
esse
I would
momento.
like to hear from you about how did you face this moment? How have you been facing? Have you been facing, right? Yeah, the books helped you to they helped you to get along with this reclusion time. You are writing more, you are reading more. Tell me about your experience.
Acho que você está no mudo.
But we probably said a lot already, no?
Está fechando. We are about to finish.
Oh, okay.
Flávia, você está me ouvindo?
Flavia, can you hear me?
Eu só te ouvi, como a gente ficou nesse momento de pandemia, eu queria saber como
So in the pandemic, so how the book helped you or not in this moment of social distancing? Did you write more? Actually, I wrote a lot. I worked a lot. I have been working a lot, actually.
De conseguir sair pouco,
Yeah, you could be out of the reality. I really wrote 2 films of fiction and 6 projects of series in this meantime. And I took time to get into because for such a long time, all the news, all these narratives, really it took time to have an internal space to elaborate and to write about. And now I'm focused on the specific books connected to the film that I was writing, the script. So you have the books of the 70s, 80s, a French writer, Edouard Louis, Edith Berg. So I am in this universe of gay writers with their own experiences. So I was in this universe that is very specific. I think that's it. The books, actually, it's funny because the film that I'm doing is about a writer. The major character is a real writer. And the books are always in my life. I think it was more natural to be a writer or a journalist than become a filmmaker. It's not by any chance that I am a script writer than a filmmaker, because one of the main characteristics of the character is because she reads, is not a person, is not so film making oriented to have a poetry. So you have a lot of reading within the film, and the new film is built as the offices of the work of Herbert Daniel, and with a lot of documents. You have the titles of this life. It's a fiction, but it is constructed with the real documents. I did this in this memory, but now it's very face-to-face. So you have all the documents that are integrated to fictions that tell the story. That is a true story, but it's fictional that I'm talking. It's treated as fictional. So what is the estimate of launching? It's difficult to have this answer. It's very difficult in this time in Brazil, in the way that the culture is being treated in this country. But you have a way to go. You have the French Revolution. You have the co-productions, at least 2 years ahead. So now I want to have your final conclusion. You are more than half an hour with us. That's great, Amos. The floor is yours. I'd like. Eu gostaria.
Final words and.
Shalom.
How do you feel about this meeting, and how are you going to say goodbye for us?
I will say shalom v'leitraot, and next time we'll do it in Hebrew, no?
Shalom leitraot.
Bye-bye. Nice to talk.
Nice to talk to you.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Flávia, últimas palavras, a gente fecha esse encontro aqui.
Flavia, last words, and thank you, IBI, Amos, Flip. Thank you, Flavia. I think that's it. Thank you very much for this opportunity to have Amos with us. In this moment, you were talking about the access live, you have jokes about that, but at the same time, you have an extraordinary part of it. That is resistances to continue exchange ideas, thinking together, and articulating thoughts, and you can imagine the future. It's really difficult time. It's quite complicated. Yeah, let's go to the future. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Shalom.